Thank you so much for doing this.
Very welcome.
And by way of introduction, because we didn't prep a whole bunch to start, how do you want to introduce Jane Marsh, attorney at law in Old Lyme and several other communities?
Well, I probably would have left out the attorney at law, but now
Okay.
you put it in. I'm an attorney at law.
Well, 37 years now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's professional side of you.
Professional side, long time. I like what I do. I'm very much a lawyer 100% of the time, but I don't feel that's anything particularly special. It's just a thing.
It's just what you do.
And other people treat me that way too.
Yeah.
They don't hesitate to say, oh, by the way, could you answer this question, including all of my family?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like going to the doctor, and then you see the doctor away from the office, and they've always
Yep.
got a question for the doctor.
In the Stop and Shop, it's down one aisle and counter one or two, round up the next aisle, all the way through the store. Yes, and they know me, but I don't necessarily know them
Yeah.
because I don't remember always that.
Sure.
Even a couple of weeks before I helped them buy their house.
Yeah.
Pretty sad.
Yeah. No,
it's true.
Yeah, it's just you're on the other side of that equation,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of people come through.
Yep.
37 years, you've seen some changes.
In my practice, I have a country practice. It's been slow. Not. I've never felt left behind. I came with my load of computers to join my father, and he was already falling way behind, and that's why he, I'm sure, desperately pleaded with me to come.
Come help.
Yep.
And what do you mean by fall behind? You mean with technology, or
Yeah,
just the sheer volume?
he didn't
of
even
work?
know. No, he didn't even know how to use a copy machine. I think I taught him how to use the Xerox machine probably 5 years into it, by taking his hand and saying, okay, you can press the button now. And he stayed there all afternoon making copies. He was so excited that he could do that. What they had when I came was the old 3M machine, where you took a piece of paper, put it on top of what you wanted to copy, ran it through a thing like a wringer on a washing machine,
Yeah.
took it back out. That took about a minute. Took it back out, peeled a piece of pink paper off it, put that pink paper on another piece of white paper, and ran it through again, and you got one copy.
And that's not even a Gestetner. Like that sounds like before a Gestetner machine.
Yeah, I don't even know what a Gestetner is.
It's not teachers mimeograph.
Oh, the mimeograph. Oh, definitely. I did those in school.
Yeah.
The smell was very memorable. Yeah, I think it was this. What's it? Acetic acid or something. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. No, acetone.
So
Yeah.
as you tell the story, I'm thinking, okay, so Dad calls you up, come help with the law practice, and your first story is running a mimeograph machine.
Yeah.
How many years of law school for that?
Well, you see, I wanted a copy machine, and he didn't have one. And I remember going to the Gold Building in Hartford and marching in there and marching up to whatever floor. It was all Xerox at that time, and saying, I want to buy a Xerox machine. And I guess people didn't buy them. They leased them or whatever. And I said, well, I don't like leasing it. I want to buy one. So there was a lot of fluttering around. But I put a giant thing. I mean, it must have been this big. I've looked it up on the internet. It looks like a space machine in my car in the trunk, and drove back to the office with this giant copy machine, and had it for quite a long time. But that was the one that Dad learned to use.
Great.
Yeah, he was very excited about it.
37 years as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me wants to do the gender thing, which is almost kind of boring nowadays in 2017. But in 1980, was there any kind of a gender story?
I've been rather blind to it most of the time. I think I'm more aware of it now.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I'm older and maturer and more observant, perhaps. But and I think presently, right now, there's some feeling about it. But I have never myself personally experienced what I think is any kind of discrimination.
Yeah.
But I think I'm oblivious to it. It might be going on
All around you.
because I'm very focused on what I'm doing and everything. People are always very pleasant to me. It's majority now men that I practice with. My law school class was almost 50% women.
That was 1980.
Yeah. almost 50%. But they didn't stick with it. They did it for a while, or they moved away, or they married and had families. But very few of the women that I knew were practicing at the time are still practicing. There are new ones that come along, but most of the men that I started with are all still going strong. So I have my colleagues are by and large male, but they're all very respectful. I don't feel like I'm being treated any differently.
Yeah.
I think I ask them to treat me differently than they treat each other. I ask them to treat me better. I don't like to horse around. I really don't. And I don't drink with them after work. They are work people. I have my family and my very extended family.
Yeah.
So I'm not socializing with my lawyer friends.
Yeah.
And I think that actually keeps the relationships better.
Yeah, there's something to that, isn't there?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. But I do notice in the people that I help, gender issues for them. Things where they've counted on, a guy being sticking with them and looking after them because they stayed home and raised a family, and then certain promises don't come true.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cleaning up to do for middle-aged women, but nothing that's earth-shattering. I don't think. Small community.
Thanks for exploring that a bit, because it's a fascinating perspective. The gender thing, the profession you chose or chose you, and in the 37 years.
Yep.
Because you've watched different decades of any kind of political shift or access shift.
Yep.
In interviewing other guests along these lines, it's interesting to listen to them. I'm thinking of other ones that are in their 70s, and one gentleman was in his mid-90s, talking about the impact of feminism and the shift in workplace, the shift in home, and not necessarily judging it, but just what was it like, because you lived through it,
Right.
That adds a nice...
it does. It has to have had an impact. Some positive, some negative. I think that men sometimes may be feeling a little pushed out, because women definitely took nicely to all the bureaucratic type jobs. And now I think the women are still in there, and a lot of the guys that were in manufacturing and things like that are out.
Yeah, catching a newspaper the other day about changes going on in Connecticut as a state, and companies leaving, opportunities for work dropping,
Right.
Impact of technology, impact of robotics. It's tough for a state or even a town to adapt. You would be in the middle of some of that as a lawyer, because those interactions and transactions would all have to go through a legal process at some point. So,
well, and even lawyers. I mean, my computer is another employee or two. It always has been. I watched Dad with his secretary, Mrs. Gladding, and he totally depended on her. And she did all the clerical stuff. He had no idea how to do it. He couldn't have typed a letter or anything.
Yep.
But when I arrived with my computer, I arrived with another person.
Yeah.
And I still use it. I mean, I'm sitting there using it while people are talking. They'll tell me what they want in their will, and I'll whip around, and the screen's right behind me, and I'll type it up for them, print it out. And they're thrilled. They think that's the best thing ever. Yeah.
And have you enjoyed doing law all this time?
Yes, I always have really taken to it. In the beginning, it was a little stressful because I wasn't really sure what was going to hook me about it, because I was doing documents and contracts and all that kind of stuff. And before, I'd gotten a graduate degree in music composition, and I'd end up with something tangible. I'd produce some sounds. And I also did graphic arts, and I'd produce something. And so when I hit the law office, as much as I wanted to help my father, I was a little bit, wondering whether there was enough in it to really hook me. But I think probably about a year and a half or so after I'd been struggling there, and he gave me all the worst cases, the things he didn't want to do. He got shoved across the desk to me. And he also made me the boss. He was 70 years old. And when I got past the bar and came in and said, "Dad, I passed the bar," he stood up from his chair and he said, "Now this is your chair, and I'm going in the back room and take it more easy." So I got all the bad stuff. Plus, I had to. So I learned very quickly what I needed to know, and he was very helpful in terms of. It's sort of like the culture of an old-fashioned law office. He imparted that to me very well, and I still do it today. No pretension or anything like that. He was very good, and he was very good when I had to go to court, which I did a lot in the beginning. The judges would always go like this, and they'd say, "Are you Lee Marsh's granddaughter?" And I'd say, "No, I'm his daughter." And they'd always say something really nice about Dad at that point.
Oh, that's
So
kind.
yeah, it helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that's just the theatrics of court.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are exposed to television or movies version of court,
Mm-hmm.
which may not reflect
Yeah.
what goes on in real life. But the camera won't show. But you're like 5 foot nothing in height.
Yeah, I count that extra 3/4 inches that I have very carefully.
Yeah, exactly. So the theater of it, I could easily imagine in you walk, fully loaded, fully professional, but like you've probably dealt with your whole life, there's that size thing, and there'll be a hesitation till people get their head around.
I use it very much to my advantage. Think about this. When I'm sitting at my desk in the office and I don't wear fancy clothes, I just wear regular clothes. I don't wear my shorts, but I'm not dressed up. And people will come in the office and they'll see my secretaries and they'll sort of, they'll say, "Well, she'll see you," and go in. And they have come in and they've looked right at me and then backed right out of the office and said, "Where's the lawyer?"
And you got to cut people a bit of slack.
Oh, it's perfect because they feel so bad that they did that, that when they come in, they're apologizing all over the place, and I'm saying, no, it doesn't make any difference. But it's funny. But I lost my train of thought before saying what ended up hooking me is that about a year and a half into it, or maybe two, someone that I'd talked to before called me up again about to do something and said, "Jane, something you told me made a huge difference in my life." And I could see myself perk right up. And I said, "It did?" And of course, I couldn't remember anything about what I'd said, but the person assured me that, yes, it did. And I could just feel it right at that moment saying, well, I got to figure out how to do this every time, how to and not to take a lot of time doing it because I'm not a therapist, so I don't get more than one session. But how could I perfect that talent of being able to say things that make a real difference and help people lickety split? And I have spent my entire career figuring that out, and I have figured a few things out. So it's and that's why it's so pleasant because there's always a new human with a new issue. They're never the same. They follow some, patterns, but they're never the same. And to understand the person themselves well enough so that I can advise them as if I'm their voice talking to them. And because then they'll take that advice, they'll do that. And I've had a blast, and I still have a blast. I tell everybody I got 21 more years to go because that's how long Dad went, and I'm not going to let him be there longer than I will be. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And as you describe that awareness of the connection with other people, that you're there to help, I keep thinking this has to wander back to music because you just touched it lightly. You were doing something else before becoming a lawyer, and it was musical.
Yeah, I didn't see myself as a lawyer until Dad said, "You're coming home." Right.
Yeah. That's just the way
He said it
was.
in a nice way, sort of like, "We're going to sell the house if you don't come home." That was
That'll
it.
do it.
That was it.
So before that, the musical studies and work and passion. Can you give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I had, when I was in college, I did philosophy and music because I'd always had that sort of creative side. And I also have sort of an analytical side. So I've got, my mother was a painter, so I think I got half from her. And Dad being the lawyer, and of course, he was a farmer and he was very passionate about his cows too. But I have sort of half and half. So I was pursuing the sort of, I'm not sure what I would call it, less practical half. I'd actually gotten the master's degree already and was about to start in the doctorate, but I was realizing that either I was going to have to live in a big city to do what I wanted. I wanted to write or create music for television and movies. I was doing electronic music at University of Illinois, so I was there for their computers too. So I was in a lab. I wasn't, playing myself or orchestrating, conducting anything, not working with the prima donna musicians. I was in there patching things because he didn't have anything then. So I had lines of oscillators and all that, and I was making music. And but I realized that kind of thing was just I would have to be in Nashville or Los Angeles or New York, and I am not a city person. At least I'm not aware that I'm a city person. And so I was saying, well, then I'm going to have to turn around and teach this to somebody else and be at a college somewhere and teach it. And that really wasn't my big goal. And personal computers hadn't happened yet, so there certainly wasn't GarageBand or anything like that. So when Dad called, and I was trying to figure out something for my husband to do, and he was kind of at loose ends. And when Dad said, he really needed me, and he tried to find somebody else to go into practice with him so he could transition out, and he hadn't found anybody, I thought about it and said, well, it's more practical because I get more of the things that I want. And the philosophy was sort of that side, of thinking deeply about things and figuring things out. And so I guess, channeled into the other side. And did that, and I was equally happy.
So do you think the musical awareness side of you, which is so intuitive and creative, comes to play when you told your story about honing down your message when dealing with a client, so it's down to one specific thing so that they get it, and for them they go through a threshold, the second it clicks?
It's got to be in there. It's got to be in there because it is a very creative process of almost being another person to the point where you can figure out what you need to say to them. And it's, I don't know exactly how I would explain the way in which I think it's parallel, but there's something that would be like it because there's no rules. And if somebody says, Jane, how do you do that? I can't really answer how I do it. I can say that I listen quite a bit, but I listen for things that it's sort of like they're singing a song and it's their particular song, and I'm listening for their thumbprint on what they're describing, and it just comes to me. But I have to be quiet in my own mind. I can't think about myself. I have to be totally erasing of myself and just sort of there and available and listening, and I pick up on it. And I am sure I say very strange things. If people recorded me, I might have to be straitjacketed because I do whatever I need to do to help, to get that person. And it's generally that they're in some kind of a rut, thinking-wise, and they're feeling sorry for themselves, or there's somebody else that's terrible or whatever, and I have to interrupt it in some way.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get a little, I have a hanky box over in the corner that has to come out sometimes, not because I'm mean, but that it hits a nerve somewhere in what they're thinking about.
You're trying to shift the pattern or an assemblage point. Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan will talk about the assemblage point, perception point. Once people glom onto that perception point, they kind of hang on to it pretty tight.
Yep.
And sometimes their freedom will come when they can let go of that. Sometimes that letting go is quite powerful.
Right, it is. I also have a hobby that has helped me a lot. I have a hobby of reading about neuroscience. I never studied one bit of psychology. There's something about it that rubbed me the wrong way. I believe in it. And, I've argued with philosophers too, but I really have to be behind something. But some friend of mine, when I was 19, gave me a subscription to a magazine called Science News, which is just an agglomeration magazine at that time. It just printed the latest in everything. So I'd read it from cover to cover, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it. And then I subscribed to Scientific American back when it was a little more scientific. But anyway, I just read it, and I found myself gravitating and really drilling in on those things. And then people realized I had an interest, so they start giving me books. And the thinking of the brain as something physical, not metaphysical, and knowing a little bit about how it works and about its components. If I talk to people, say a person who has an addiction or something, about the physical way about addiction, they're perfectly willing to talk to me about it. They're not, you know, worrying at all that I'm going to judge them in any way. And we just have a discussion about possibly, you know, and I tell them about some rat experiments or something like that. They're all very polite. They'll listen, and they make the connection. And so it's a good bit of knowledge that is apparently not directly related, but turns out to have been, because now psychology is only becoming having neuroscience and psychology to come together. Psychology is becoming more of a science because it's sort of like studying electrons. You have to have the math and the theoretical, but you also have to have the phenomenological. You have to know about quantum mechanics and be able to, you know, explode a few atoms before people will believe the whole enchilada. So this is a little bit the same, I think.
Yep. The impact of positivism in science. If you can do it, then give me how you did it. And if I can do it, and then they can do it, therefore it's true. So needing to see to believe, but that made it a struggle to believe in the spirit or that intangible between people, that energy between people that we already know if we can be still.
Right.
And find that vibration between each other and find that connection. Chopra does some interesting stuff. Some of it's well marketed, but there was one in particular, the resurrecting the body, reinventing the body, resurrecting the soul. And he brings together neuroscience, metaphysics, and some version of spirituality for those that like that. It was about the notion of will, because where does the will come from? Science can break it down into parts, can kind of recreate the parts, reconstruct to a degree. Neural pathways, synaptic connections, impact of different chemical combinations. Still doesn't account for how it started in the first place.
And what direction is it going, and why is it going there?
Yeah. Which goes back to music and the creative element, and where something new happens, which is more play and creativity than...
Well, and I think because I'm an amateur, too, I can suspend my belief when I need to, or suspend my analytical self and my critical self when I need to, because I'm not encumbered by the thought process, you know, whatever they say about the car talk guys. So it allows me to, and I love making relationships, you know, between all the things that I read about. But if I ever talk to somebody who really studies these things, they always explain why, you know, that's probably not the case. But
yeah, because they'll reinforce their paradigm. Yeah. They'll want to stay with
and
what
they'll
they
speak
know.
their language, you know, and so I think it's actually nice that an amateur uses it in the way that I do, because, you know, I don't have to be right if it works.
Did any of this, I don't imagine any of this happened during your law training.
No. And I have thought...
Do you think that should be something that should be looped back into
no question.
curriculum?
I've actually spoken with the president of our Connecticut Bar Association about it. And I can see how it's working its way in is right now it's for lawyers. You know, lawyers who are addicted to something, or lawyers who are traumatized, so the focus isn't on helping the clients by the knowledge. It's helping the lawyers themselves, as if, you know, they need to be invincible. But I think, you know, as I age and as I'm waiting, that it will come. I just don't have the time. I should. You know, when you're in the trenches and you're a practitioner, you can think a lot of things, but you don't have time to sit down and write it, or, you know, just stop everything and go do something. I mean, I've taught some classes, and I definitely, you know, grab a hold of the collar of people that I think will be, you know, interested, and talk to them about it. And you never know, then the butterfly effect takes that away. But yes, I agree that lawyers themselves don't know most of the time what they're looking at. So a person can be, first of all, a traumatized person. They often are when they're coming to the law office. They're not okay.
No, it's not a happy moment.
And then the lawyer proceeds to mindlessly drag them through a whole bunch more trauma by making them go to court and fight the other person, and never even occurs to them that they're terrified. When they are terrified. So it's like adding more and more, and then they present their bill after they're all done, and they're terrified then. So it's that many times I've actually had lawyers saying, "Jane, do you see something I don't see?" And I say, "Yeah, I do." But being able to see it certainly then helps me avoid, recommending that they do something like that. Go traumatize themselves some more. And I don't know, it helps me make an immediate connection with people that I possibly see it. And I do spend a lot of time trying to explain. It's difficult to explain when you reach your own understanding point. Difficult to explain to another lawyer or another person how you got there and how will you get to where I am. You know, I know so many things about my life all come together. When I was young, I studied Eastern religion just because I really took to it in a big way. And I know that, by reading biographies of a lot of people who were, generally from Asia or India, that I was picking up something about that being present and not, moving ahead or worrying about what just happened, and then applying that again to what it is that I do all the time. Not just sitting on the yoga mat, but all the time. My mind is much quieter when I'm in the middle of somebody else's tornado, because that's how they feel. They really are all worked up, but they definitely appreciate the fact that they notice that the other person is not. And that helps them to come down to a lower level and probably resolve certain things on their own.
Yes.
But to try to explain it
Yep.
is very difficult.
They have to experience it, because explaining is like description as opposed to getting into, but this is what it feels like, which is where music can come in.
Right. Yeah. You're getting a picture took. More than picture. You want my twin to come and sit here?
No,
Oh.
I'm not available.
Oh. Okay, so you got that.
Yeah, that's good. It'll be on the edges somewhere.
That's right.
The when talking about connection between people and that awareness of it by being still, there's this lovely clip on YouTube, Bobby McFerrin, and Don't Worry, Be Happy. He's at a neuroscience convention, and they brought him up on stage. You've got three people in suits, the neuroscientists, and you got Mr. McFerrin in his blue jeans and his shirt. And we'll put it in the tags for the show. But he's demonstrating through music. He's doing a pentatonic scale, and he walks to the front of the stage. He bounces on one spot. He sounds a note. I can't sing, so da da, and he bounces da, and the audience go da when he hits that note, and he goes over a half step da 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 da, and he starts bouncing back and forth, and then they're following him da 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 da, and then he doesn't give direction on the third thing, and he jumps to a third spot. They automatically hit the note.
Pick a 5.
Then everybody laughs. And in that moment, that's the connection. You can't describe that, but you can walk them through it. After he was done playing this wonderful melody for about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, bouncing all over the stage through 12 notes, and they follow him because they're playing the bass line or whatever it's called. And they're playing the bass line. He's going da 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 while he's going da da da. At the end of it, he sits down, and the host says, "You want a job in neuroscience? Because you just did in 3.5 minutes what we can't do. Writing books, right?" Which is sort of reinforces your point. And he explained at the end, no matter where I go in the world, no matter what culture, what language, everyone knows that. So there's something about music that's so universal to our process.
Yeah, I think music excites a part of your brain that's not used for anything else. Some parts of it are used for something else. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but if I play and I'm just making it up, because that's what I really like to do, put the headsets on, put the keyboard down, and just make it up. If I'm doing that, the first so many minutes, I don't really feel like I'm in the groove. But after probably 10 minutes, I would say I know that where I'm doing it with has shifted to a different place. And it's one where if someone comes in the room, I'm aware of their presence. And I might even be able to keep a conversation with them, but I am not paying attention to it. There's two brains going on, and I'm not really helping them very much. And I've seen it in musicians playing on stage, that people will be sure that they're looking at them. I know they're not looking at them. They're looking out, because when you get into that particular place, your normal sensory input with your eyes is not the same. And it is with your ears. You're doing a really good job there. And maybe it's like what it is to be, blind. You're just relying on the sound, and it's got a direct, connection. And I notice something similar when I'm doing crossword puzzles. That if I sit down for a crossword puzzle, my mother was fantastic at crossword puzzles. She was just amazing. I have to sit for, 10 or 20 minutes. And I look at them and nothing's coming, or little bits are coming, only the easy ones. But after about 20 minutes, something else changes. And suddenly I have access to this vast array of words. And it's not, crossword puzzles aren't just words and the definitions, because the ones that I do generally have another fun aspect to them in some way. They're puns or something. And you suddenly are able to make those connections. But you couldn't before. You absolutely could not. And if you only spent 20 minutes on it, you would never know. So you have to have that drive, that will, whatever you say, that you want to do it. And there are a lot of people who say, my husband, why would you ever want to do that? But it's because he's never broken through. He's never gone past, 5 minutes, and then he throws it down and says, I can't do this. When we do the cookie painting, same deal. You've seen those? Have you been here? Yeah, that my first cookie is usually not my best cookie. But after I've been doing it for just a little bit, then I pick them up and I'm just doing it and somehow in the zone of doing it, because there the creativity is to look at this little white thing that's got nothing on it and say, what is it? Yep. And in the beginning, you have only dumb answers. They're not creative at all. Yep. But as you do it for a while, I feel like it's coming in a different place that I just don't normally use in day to day. But you're probably right. I've never even thought about it. I probably am using it at the law office, because people sit down and I don't just spend 20 minutes. We're usually talking for a lot longer than that.
We're kind of talking about resonance, people resonating with each other. Mm-hmm. And there's another lovely clip, Dr. Sue Morter on TED Talks. Mm-hmm. And you'll know this one like breathing, but for the sake of audience, maybe. Guitar, opposite sides of the room, they're tuned to each other. You pluck that D string vibrates. Mm-hmm. Our hearts are 50 times more powerful than our brains for awareness. So if we can tune our hearts to each other, things happen that transcend literal description, because description isn't going to capture it. Mm-hmm. When you talk about, it's almost a meditative state. When you talk about cookies, doing music, your version of music, or doing crossword puzzles. Yeah. Chances are when you're working with your clients, you're so centered and so grounded, they're feeling it off of you and follow you right into that space. And then something affirming happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would say that, but they relax. Most times they're nervous of me, and I always think that's amusing, because And so we have to get that out of the way right away.
Yeah, well, there's a perception of a power imbalance.
Right.
They're walking into something they don't know.
Yeah, but I'm only this big,
But
you know, and I can
you
barely
use the
see over the
size.
desk. It's over quick. It's over quick. And you want to know something that's very interesting? I do a lot of telephone conversations with people and email that I've never met. And the telephone, they know who I am on the telephone. And they can be calling from Texas because somebody that knows me said, you got to call her. So I have never met them before. And will be shortly thereafter deep into whatever it is. And I'm always amazed that they can first trust me and then, but also pick up this other thing where we're going to go together and we're going to get to the heart of it. And then I wondered, you know, because email, now I sometimes feel like I'm in a third world country because I've been outsourced because I'm sitting there just, you know, typing answers into the computer. But even in email, when there's no sound of my voice or anything like that, maybe because I throw a few jokes in there and I'm a wiseacre or something, I'm not really sure, but people do get the idea, even then. And they relax. They know I'm not a stuffed shirt lawyer, and I think they get me, even in just my typed words. And I'm shocked at that, actually.
In slightly different direction, some things I want to be able to touch on.
Yeah,
while
you
we got
can
the
touch
time.
on them.
Yeah. When I read the bio or the description on the website for your stuff, agriculture has a big piece in your history.
Yep.
I'm inferring from what you said about your dad. He was a farmer, and just the property here. It's a mini farm in lots of ways.
Yeah, Dad was very passionate about the Jersey breed and bringing it back. In his mind, it had been destroyed because they had bred jerseys with bigger cows, other brands, and he wanted them to be small because they had unique qualities as the smallest of the dairy animals. They were easy to handle, and they also gave a lot more protein and butterfat in their milk. And as you breed them up to be bigger animals, because people just have a tendency to want to have things bigger, figure that one out, those traits get watered down. And you can't preserve the concentrated milk product if you don't preserve the concentrated cow. So he was just passionate about that, and he rose very quickly up in the ranks of the Jersey Cattle Club because it's a purebred thing, all about it. And he spent plenty of money doing it too, but he was just driven. He wanted to do nothing other than that, really. The law might have been a kind of a secondary thing. That came from the political self, who was the earlier self, but the cows sort of took over. And of course, that was when I was young and growing up. So Dad was a gentleman farmer, but my sister and I were on the farm when we were little, right in there. There was a nice big manure pile one day down there, and we spent the whole day sliding on it because it was just so much fun. Then came back inside and got in trouble, but you know, we were definitely in it, and we lived at the farm where the animals were until we were 6. So that's what we did, out the door into the barn, you know, and that's where. So we were. So I've always had a very much more of an agricultural side than my mother or father actually did, because I was being influenced by being with the men that took care of the cows. And for some reason, I always wanted a garden, so I started growing things. We had, when we moved here, Mom got this man named Henry Monroe, and he lived in the house at the bottom of the driveway, and he was one of those Renaissance old-timer men. He could do everything. And he wanted his own vegetable garden. That was one of the requirements because he'd been a nurseryman. And so he made one right across the driveway from his house. And, you know, it must have been that I was in there and interested in seeing how you could make your own stuff and take it inside and eat it. And so neither my mother or father ever did that. and they didn't do music either. The only thing they did do was the law. So I had but that connection with, gardening and all that. Dad had always been the lawyer for the Connecticut Farm Bureau, and he just wanted to retire. And so they said, you have to. And I was pulled in, I think, because of my knowledge of the history of it, because Dad always came home and told everything.
Yeah.
Didn't mention, names most of the time, because that would have been wrong. But he told the stories all the time. And so I sort of grew up with the history of farming and what was going on, because his legislative side, that was not his lawyer side, his legislative side, he was always trying to help out, in the farming arena. So I guess I just moved in when he retired, and I'm still the general counsel for the Connecticut Farm Bureau. And
so you would have seen food is a big issue today, and security of food supply. So does that come up in your work at all?
yeah. I mean, farmers have always believed that it's going to be a disaster a lot sooner than it has been.
Yeah.
They're always panicked, but somehow, one way or another, we tap on another third world country to supply our food or whatever, or mechanize something or other. But, there's always this belief that at some point, I mean, farmers look at it in one way, that they want it to be the law of supply and demand, finally treating them with some respect instead of not.
Yeah.
And it still isn't.
Yeah, because the debt loads for farmers are phenomenal.
Yeah. And because they also try to mechanize and they try to do things like that. And in Connecticut, the cost of land is huge. We do have some laws that help to reduce the taxation burden if you are a farmer, but it doesn't change what you've paid for the property. So most people who are farmers somehow inherited their land. They didn't buy it because they just can't. But they do protect it, and they get dirt under their fingers, and then they're farming for the rest of their lives, and they can't figure out why, because they're not making that much money. So that's the group of people I help. And my main job is they're intersecting with suburbanites and urban people. And there is no understanding. There's absolutely none. I have people come to visit me in my vegetable garden, and they say, this is in my lifetime and yours. Everybody knew that a potato was come from under the ground when I was young. Everybody in my class at elementary school would have known that. Now adults and children come and they're totally surprised. Or that a bean grows this way, or that's broccoli. They have no connection to it.
Isn't that scary?
Yes, very scary. I have to explain to him, my husband, why do I do it? Because it takes a lot of time. And I say, it's hard to explain. There's something about me that always wants to prove that I can do it still. So that's a security thing. And, I like to think of myself somehow as reenacting the pioneer days. But it's not, he says, well, you must be an earth mother. No, I'm not an earth mother. I'm really just a farmer. I just want to be able to grow what I eat. And it's all about getting food and putting it on the table. And it isn't, look, the plant has come up. It's none of that stuff. It's a very pragmatic approach to it. And that's definitely in my blood. And who knows where it came from? Really, I don't know, because Dad didn't do it. There were earlier generations of his family, the Marsh family, that did attempt it. But they primarily weren't farmers. Not at all. I don't know about, what Betsy has to say about hers, but they were, businessmen. All of the relations that I'm aware of going back, lots of lawyers, but not farmers. But great-grandfather who came here, he laid out a complete farm. Everything was a farm. He built it all.
His name was?
Horace Moss. Moss. And he married one of the Elizabeth Griswolds. Everybody has to have one.
Yeah, I'll make that a bumper sticker.
Yeah. So, and he came here. He was returning in his old age. He'd already, he was a civil engineer and a banker, and he did the designs for railroads and railroad crossings and bridges and everything else out in the West. But then I think he did well enough so that he became, started a bank. And I guess his father started a bank, and he went in with him and had a bank. And I could see in his papers, I have a lot of his old papers, that he invested in something that he thought would be a good prospect. So he was also helping other entrepreneurs do things and giving them. It was more like that he buy stock in them rather than he was a lender. He wasn't a real lender, but you could see he was interested in all kinds of stuff. But by the time he came here, I think he was bringing his wife back here. She wasn't that well, and she lived a whole lot longer than he did because he died not that long after he finished it. This house was started in 1896 and finished after the turn of the century, so it took him a while. But they were building, the Finnegan farm and a huge barn there that's not there anymore that got wiped out by the 38 hurricane. It imploded. But he built the house at the bottom of the driveway, that farm, and Nonesuch was built around that time. There's a lot of stuff all built, yes, and cleared the land, although it was pretty barren already, and started up a farm. He had a dairy over in the big barn that's no longer there.
Before too much time slides by, we have to capture the story
about
the cow
Elsie.
and the photo.
Okay.
We don't have to go long, but it's your legacy.
Yes, I'll tell you.
It's a nice one for the audience.
It was Dad's celebrity moment. He had a couple about his cows, but you got to get the background of how we ended up with the right cow. He had gone to the island of Jersey, which is just off the coast of France, and he had acquired certain animals and brought them back. And this was his way of introducing them back in and getting the old blood back into the American Jerseys and try to get them to have the good qualities that they used to have. And one of the ones that he bought was Imported Keeper's Winter Fairy. And the imported meant that she came from the island of Jersey. And every cow, of course, was a named cow. And their names got extraordinarily long because everybody had to be acknowledged as to who did what. And sometimes the farm name went in there, and then the bull that was the great grandfather. And so they had all these names. Mom and Dad had a blast naming cows. But Imported Keeper's Winter Fairy, after he brought her here, he couldn't get her in calf. He couldn't get her to produce an offspring. And you don't get any milk from a cow if they don't have a calf. And so he was on the verge of sending Imported Keeper's Winter Fairy to the hamburger factory because he couldn't. And he didn't do that very often. But I guess it was the New York World's Fair and Borden's company announced that they were going to have this competition. And they wanted to have an Elsie the cow for the New York World's Fair. There had been another Elsie the cow in 1949. And I guess maybe there was a fair involved in that too. But they needed a new one because they don't last that long. And so there was this competition, and there were 10,000 entries thereabouts. And Dad entered her face, which was very beautiful. It was a dished face. These old Jerseys don't have the Roman nose like the other cows do. They have a very dished face and big brown eyes. And all of Dad's cows had horns. He would not take the horns off. And they just had a beautiful look. And she won. And Dad went to heaven. He was just, ecstatic. And I think they paid him a pretty good price. I don't remember whether it was $12,000 or something, but at the time for Dad, for a cow, it was a lot of money. But they announced that, the cow went down to the Better Living building at the World's Fair, but they wanted to have a press conference. And it was so fun. This was so hilarious because Dad had spent all this time, he had a clipboard with all this information about her parents and her grandparents, how much milk they made and all that. And we went down to Macy's. My mother spent the entire time telling us what we weren't allowed to say, because my sister and I have a way of just saying, as you can see. So that was, and we were sitting, yes, mommy, all the way down. She dressed us up in these beautiful silk dresses, not anything that you'd ever wear around a cow.
How old are you at that time?
1965, I was 14 years old, probably 13, because I hadn't hit July yet, because I think it was in the early part of the year. And we got there, and we had to go to an upper floor in Macy's. That's where this event was taking place. And there wasn't anything on that floor. When you got out of the elevator, it was empty, except they had Elsie over in the middle of the floor over there. And a huge number of press, which I'd never experienced before. Dad probably had, but I hadn't. And my twin and I were dressed exactly alike. And of course, what happened was Dad, with his clipboard, got totally forgotten, and the press people just delved into the fact that we were twins and asked us questions. And I could see Dad was way on the outside of this circle, probably like 50 people, all with their pens and steno pads then, asking questions. There were probably still cameras, but there was no movie, as far as I'm aware. Nothing moving. I never got a contract offer for Hollywood anyway. But it was, I'm sure we were being careful about what we said, because we generally were good children. But somebody said, well, now we have to take your picture. And so they took the picture that you have, one of us on each side of the cow. And I believe it got on the front page of the New York Times newspaper for some day. I'm not positive about it because I tried to look it up and I was unable to find it. But anyway, it made the rounds, that picture. Mm-hmm. And Dad never got to say anything about her production or anything like that. And my mother was just running around the outside, jumping up to try to see what was going on in the middle. So it's a wonderful memory that I still have. And then they took her to the fair. We went a couple of times to see what they did with her. They had her on a stage in a cage, and there's scenery that would move back and forth, and they were telling all about how milk was produced and everything. And it was Borden and, all the things that Elsie would do, and eat a straw hat, I remember But Elsie just sort of stood there, and sometimes she'd scratch herself on the scenery and stuff like that. And eventually Dad was very unhappy about it because they didn't know how to take care of a cow. And she got milk fever. And, milk fever is when they're not keeping the udder clean, or milking her properly, or leaving her too long before she milked. And I can remember him going into a complete rage over that and making sure that a vet was called. Then they decided that she should have a baby in the stage presentation. And so they had a 1-year-old calf, a heifer, not a calf. And that calf was sucking on her udder. And Dad, the most important part of a cow and the most beautiful part is the udder. And they wrecked her udder by having too old of an animal nursing on her. So Dad wasn't happy, but he still collected his money. And eventually they gave her back to us so she could spend the rest of her days at the farm. And that was good. So, and we always used to get a box of every Borden product. That was probably for 20 years after that, at Christmas time. Every single thing they made got sent to us, and we'd unpack it. But it was everybody's in the family's celebrity moment. Big deal.
Kind of celebrity moment.
Yeah. And people in town still remember. I mean, it's a big deal in town. I never, at the time, thought it was all that big a deal because we were, inundated with cows. And the cows that Dad had were about winning prizes at fairs. These were not just milking cows. And so he won a lot of prizes at fairs and did very well. And he became president of the World Jersey Cattle Bureau. So he achieved the pinnacle that he wanted to. So this thing about Elsie sort of faded into the past. But lately, I mean, I've been told that it's the big thing about Old Lyme, that Elsie the cow comes from there.
Oh my.
And I say, yeah.
Well, sort of on that theme, and we probably have about 10 or so minutes left. Um, you're part of the Griswold clan.
Yeah.
By however convoluted.
Oh, very tightly in there.
So I don't want to go back into all of the pieces and parts, but it'd be nice looking forward. Can you share some thoughts about looking forward for Griswold Point, whether it's the Griswold Point Association, whether it's your version of what can happen for Old Lyme as a community? Because the point is part of the community, but in some ways it's not part of the community.
It's very special.
Yeah, and in some ways a transition or a threshold of some sort is going to be crossed over in the next 10 years of what it becomes in the future.
You know, it's interesting. All my life, I have thought that the threshold was going to be crossed.
Okay.
Because, you know, it's an anachronism in some ways.
Yeah, it's a throwback to another era.
As this house is, you know, how my life is. But, you know, because I have lived a life and existed and figured out how to do it and still be myself, you know, and I'm not a hoity-toity individual. I'm glad that I turned out to be a lawyer because it does provide the kind of income that I need in order to support this place.
Just to sustain it.
Yeah, because there was no endowment that came along with it. Dad did a number on the endowment and it was zero at the time he died. So that was, and that's basically what it is that the homes are expensive to take care of, pay the taxes, have insured. They're also labor intensive because they were built at times when people had people to help them. And we did when we were young. As I said, Mom had Henry Monroe and she had a few people. Definitely the people who built the house, there's a whole floor up there for people to stay. And I know there was a chauffeur and a cook and all that. Now, no one has that. They just don't have it. So I'm on the lawnmower where Jack is, and I'm cutting the fields, and people don't want to do that. I'm very wedded to it still.
Yep.
The whole idea that I'm going to take care of it. I got into that mode by trying to make Dad happy, and he was very happy that we were able to. When we moved here, the place was all overgrown because I had a great aunt who was living here, and she was very elderly, and she just couldn't handle it. So there was just everything had all grown over, and the place looked very sad. But he probably spent all of his last money clearing the property and getting it back in shape. And so he didn't want it to fall backwards, so I became the groundskeeper as my extra job, which I like. I take any excuse to be outside. So, but the next generation in my family is not going to want to do that. But to me, I like it. It defined my life. And I like the fact that I have very good definition of what I'm about and what I'm for. But other people, and even my contemporaries, because, you know, the Timmy Griswolds, those are a little older, but they're my first cousins. That's the layer I belong with, but I'm probably the youngest of that layer. They're just not the same. They want to go on trips, they want to travel. You know, they aren't going to, they have a little bit in it. You know, Timmy rides a tractor, but they don't have it to the degree necessary. And certainly the next generation's not at all. So I think it's that there's the wish to keep it, but not the knowledge of how do you keep it, or the commitment, the wanting to stay where you are. I don't have any problem. I don't care about going on vacation. I really don't. So that makes it okay because then I will stay here. I'll be satisfied. I can play with the blades of grass outside, and it's all okay. If you want to go on a vacation, you can't really own places like this. There's no vacation here. You know, in the middle of winter, you maybe could go skiing because nothing's happening outside, but they are very, very demanding. And the houses over there are just like this one.
Yes.
And they were built for another time. So, when I look at them all trying to preserve it, of course, they're just duplicating thoughts that I have. I don't necessarily tell them what I'm going to do because I'm trying to help them decide what they're going to do. And sometimes how I think they're just flailing all over the place um, because because there's different people, a lot of different types of people, a lot of different circumstances. Um, they're all, in one place, and they're all trying to be of one mind, but they're not really of one mind. And some of them live there, some of them don't. Some just visit on 4th of July. And the one thing that's very interesting is that how well the Ely family has done, though, because they made their thing into a corporation and diluted it so much that nobody feels like they're in charge. And it also spreads, Matthew had this work ethic that he definitely made the others undertake. So they have their leaf day and they have these days and they all come and work. And they all come and work, and their under generations do that. So I don't know whether the other folks over there are going to take any hints from Ely and Co., but Ely and Co. probably will last longer because they've got a spread out situation where more people share in it. But even there's rumblings in that group every once in a while, and about how can I get my share? I don't want to, I never go there anymore or something like that. That's very. I mean, it's typical of people. I say myself as a lawyer, people want to set up they have a beach house and they want to make a family enclave out of it because they've had such a good time. Usually, it's when they were young. They went there. They didn't have any responsibilities at all, but it was just heaven. And so they think of it as this heavenly place where there's no responsibilities and just a lot of fun. Then they grow up and they start paying out, but they still want it and they want their children to experience it or whatever. So they try to institutionalize it. And I say the longest I've ever had anybody succeed is 20 years because they start having arguments. And this is when it's just one house. They start having arguments with each other. There are different emotions involved, different access, and the thing either becomes a source of anger, which is really not good, or it is sold and they give up on it. So, Griswold Point has lasted a lot longer than that. And, there's a lot of indoctrination that's spent. You didn't experience that. And I don't know if Betsy did either, because she was more further away from it. But man, we were indoctrinated very young, telling us all about how important the family was and everybody and all the stories and everything so that you felt invested in it. And I describe my life as being very stable for a particular reason, and it's that. So I got it explained who all of the ancestors were and all the luminaries and, a lot, I'm sure, glossed up to make better and bigger. But still, knowing that you had a governor in your family and a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and a few other things doesn't hurt. And that nobody really screwed up since then, I'm sure there have been some rogues and bounders, but they kind of don't talk about them. But so they knit you into a nice, so there's the warp, and then the woof is all the people that you know. And they made sure that we knew all of our cousins. And they had parties. I mean, my Aunt Kirby, who was Bill Griswold's first wife, was my father's sister. And she was she started the 4th of July thing. Very intent on having it. But there were many, many more events. It wasn't just 4th of July. And so we'd go over in the point and have sing-alongs together. They even had an orchestra. That was before me. They had violins and cellos and violas and everything. And she had a great singing voice. A lot of them were whiff and poofs. But for whatever reason, they got together often. And so that it created also this knowledge of all of your relatives. And I know that Betsy is my first cousin once removed. how many people know all the nomenclature and the right terminology for all of their cousins? And I know about the ones that own none such. I know it because I know them all. And I know them pretty well. So that's the other direction. So you're knit into something that says, you can't screw up. You can't be the quitter. And so you're okay. And I don't know whether it works as well for the people over there, but I think it does. I think that you'll see that, when they marry, they yank the person that they married back. Sometimes, and it doesn't matter whether it's male or female, that whoever's the family member is trying to return. And that's so there's the emotion that you have to create. These are not intellectual decisions, and that's why I have difficulty helping the group of the Griswold Point Association, because they want to reduce it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it's not that. If they want to have an agreement on something. And I understand they got an agreement on something the day before 4th of July, but I don't know how well that's going to hold. And it's only a little thing.
Yep.
It's a little thing. So, but I'm sure that at least a goodly number over there would experience life the same way I have, in terms of the, feeling knitted into a situation. And that if you ruin the memory, see, those are memories. This is the memory, this house. I'm just a transient. I'm passing through. But the house itself is the recorded memory. And when my daughter grew up here, now she's got a set of memories. She's got all of Dad's stories. Now she's got my stories. She's got my mother's stories. But they're all associated with, could be even this sofa. They're associated with the things and the places. And it's true over there too. And that helps a mind. It helps you keep that in mind as you go forward. And it allows your emotions then to attach to it because you remember it. And it's not always novelty, something new. The value is apparent. And so I think, if anything will keep it together, it would be something like that. And I just don't know how well it's working on the next generation. And you can see it doesn't have to be a wealthy generation as long as there's enough of them who feel like-minded. And I do think that the meetings themselves may be achieving some of that, because the get-togethers don't exist anymore. But they exist now in this form where we're doing business together. So you never know. You never know. So I've just been amazed that it hasn't happened already. Mm-hmm.
We should wrap up.
Okay.
We want to take a minute and close off. Do you have any final thoughts?
Well,
Whether it's the point or whether it's this, there's 1,000 things we could have talked about.
That's right, and we could do it again.
Yeah. But for today's conversation,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a feeling for how you'd like to end this?
No, because to me it's all just a continuing thing. It's like a half a thing of butter. You just cut it where you're starting, and you're going to cut it off where it ends. But it will continue. Yeah, it does continue.
Thank you.
Okay, you're
That was
welcome.
great.
I had a good time. You want to have some cucumbers?